Hello.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, Dwayne.
Hey Ron, how are you?
Good, good. Dwayne, I assume that you got my letter of support.
I did, thanks.
All right, good. All right. Uh, let me let me
I came down with a cold yesterday, so hopefully my voice doesn't go.
oh, you have a cold?
A little bit. I woke up with a deep baritone, so maybe I could go cut an album or something.
Okay. All right. Ah. So you taking some time off for the rest of the year?
Yeah, actually today's my last day, so I'll be
Oh,
out
great, great, great. So
Nice.
you get a chance
till
to heal up a little bit.
yep, yep.
How about you, sir?
Yeah, I will have some time off. Yep. Yep.
Good, good. Okay. All right. All right. All right. We have three people in the waiting room.
Okay.
So, we'll get started around about 5 after 3, if it's all right with you too.
Sure.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
All right. I didn't ask. I should have asked. Are you? Do you have visual presentations that you're doing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want me to control it, or do you? Well, I don't have it, so you have to control it. So let me give you sharing capacity.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. You can check and see if you have it.
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
able to.
yep, me too.
Okay, great. Okay. It seems to be a lot of work from USDA regarding underserved farmers.
Yeah, that's a group they're trying to reach. So a lot of grants and stuff are kind of tailored towards it kind of has an aspect of underserved farmers in there.
Well, we're operating under a preferred vendors agreement with NCBA NCLUSA regarding our work regarding underserved farmers as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of USDA monies, well, not a lot, but a decent portion of it goes towards. So if you have that aspect in your proposal, you kind of looked a bit more favorably compared to somebody else.
Well, I will share this with you that we're looking at hosting our national conference on Black cooperative agenda in Atlanta, Georgia, next year, and we're looking at framing out a discussion for underserved farmers as a preliminary to starting the conference.
Okay.
So I'll reach out to both of you, and hopefully that we can all come together and frame out something. Um, we do have resources to bring to provide for registration, travel, and hotel.
Mhm.
Okay. Have you guys reached out to anybody at UMES?
No, we haven't, and I probably need to.
Yeah, they They have a small farm. What's it called, Sarah? Small
Small
farm.
farms program.
Yeah, they do it, and it's pretty successful, right, Sarah?
Yeah, yeah. Baron Rogers is my go-to with that program. He's great to work with. Yeah.
Eh, Let me increase the volume on this here. All right. I do have a post survey that people will be getting after this webinar is over.
Oh, Sarah, I forgot. Did we did we agree to put the teaching link, the evaluation link in the thing,
I have
in
it
the
as one
chat?
of my slides, but we could put it in the chat too.
I forgot to add it on my slide. And I
Yeah,
spoke
and
to
it would be
Didi.
the same link.
Right. Didi told me I have like 17 so
Okay.
far. So I guess that's not good, right? Do we need like
I think we're
40?
supposed to have a few more. Yeah, yeah.
The peer review is good. I think I have like 9,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the other one,
Will you be emailing the attendees like our PowerPoint presentations, like a
Yes, I
PDF or
will.
something? Okay, because we could also include our teaching survey link in that email if you
Oh,
don't
okay,
mind, so then
okay.
people could
Yeah, no
evaluate our
problem.
teaching.
No problem. Yeah, we all wanted to see how we doing.
Yeah.
yep. Since we're informal education of extension, it's always hard to get, on campus they could get it whenever you take the course, you finish at the end of a course, you take it, but with extension, since we're informal, we have to kind of not beg, but beg.
Not beg, but beg.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
right. Yeah.
Mm. So hello everyone that's sitting in the waiting room waiting for us to start. We'll get started in a few moments. Just waiting to get a few more people into the room, allow them in before we start. So we'll be starting in a couple minutes. So bear with us, please. Thank you. Now, well, I just wanted you, Dwayne and Sarah, both of you to know that the window for this is 2 hours, but again, it's just the window. Yeah, you can exhaust the 2 hours or however your presentation goes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. on a conversation around sustainable farming. Um, Before we get started, just want to just go through a few house rules and that let you know that this webinar is being recorded. And so if you choose not to have yourself shown, you can close your audio, your visual, and just maintain your audio. Your microphones are muted unless you are speaking. So once we get started, and I'll leave that up to the presenters whether or not they will want you to leave your mic open and to have more of an engaging conversation. So that's just the main rules. I do want to just inform you that we are hosting our Black Co-opinomics Academy in the spring of 2025. So registration will is open now, and the academy takes place from March 6th through May the 8th. So if you have anyone that's interested in forming cooperatives, this is a good way to start to elevate their work around understanding what cooperatives are and how they can build a cooperative solidarity framework. We are hosting one Friday our financial management workshop where we talk about financial management. And so this is our last event for the year. So if you are in the Baltimore area, please do drop in and spend some time with us. All right. So let's get to talk about this webinar session. It's called Sustainable Agriculture and Conservation. What you can expect to learn: definition and importance of sustainable agriculture, key principles and goals of sustainable farming, the role of sustainable agriculture in food security and environmental health, the importance of soil health in sustainable agriculture, practices for maintaining and improving soil health, soil testing, cover cropping and crop rotation, managing soil erosion and nutrient management, strategies for efficient water use in agriculture, and importance of biodiversity in agricultural systems, and practices to enhance biodiversity on farms. Our two presenters today are, first, I'd like to introduce Sarah Hirsch, is the Agricultural Extension Agent for University of Maryland since 2018. Sarah received a PhD in soil science from University of Maryland and has a background working in agricultural research and extension in areas of soil, water, and crop management. Sarah aspires to work with farmers to improve the productivity and profitability of agriculture while conserving soil, water, and biodiversity. Dwayne Johnson is the Agriculture and Food Systems Extension Agent for the University of Maryland Extension in Kent County. His research and programming focus on developing integrated weed and management strategies for vegetable and aerodynamic crops. Through his work, he helps farmers tackle persistent weed control challenges, while promoting sustainable production practices. Dwayne earned a BS in biology from Grambling State University and an MS and a PhD in plant and environmental science from Clemson University. So without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to Dwayne and Sarah.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. See, I think, Ron, you may need to, oh, there we go. Okay, now I think I can share.
So while Sarah searches for her presentation, just want to thank you, Ron, for inviting us to, speak. Hopefully your audience would be able to learn some conservation and sustainable practices.
All right, is everybody seeing a screen that says Sustainable Agriculture and Conservation with a few photos? Yes, okay, awesome. So thank you again. We're gonna get started here. well, first of all, we wanted to let the audience know that we do an extension. So we both work for University of Maryland in Extension, and we do have federal funding, and we are required and honored to serve everyone. And our programs are available to everyone. And if there's any problems with that, this poster here will give you information about who to contact if there's any discrimination. So as an introduction, we're hoping that everybody could join us in some polls, and I'm going to try to put a link in the chat for those. Let me see here. All right, so okay, so I just put a link in the chat. If the audience could go ahead and click on that, and then hopefully we'll have a few polls come up. And I'm gonna go ahead and open the first poll, which is, we're just wondering what your connection with agriculture is. So we just have a few questions to kind of get to know each other and to know how we should have this conversation. So if you're able to go ahead and answer, what is your connection to agriculture? The choices there are farmer, agricultural service provider, agriculture student, and non-farming community member. So that would just be somebody who's interested in agriculture, but not necessarily currently working in agriculture. All right. I'm not seeing any votes coming in. Were people able to access the poll? You could also put it in the chat if that's easier, since we're kind of a small group. Okay, see one vote for agriculture service provider. Oh, okay, Crystal said she does not see a poll. Trying to. No poll in the chat. Okay, let me, oh, that maybe. Okay, that's because I'm not sure. It says I sent it to just the hosts and panelists. Ron, would you be able to share that link with everyone? I'm not when I click the drop down, it doesn't have an option for everyone. Maybe because I'm not a host. Let me try if I could put it in the.
No, I just said
Okay.
share it with everybody.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. There we go. All right, great. I see some people voting now. All right, so let me. All right, so we have majority of farmers, a few agriculture service providers, and one or two non-farming community members. Very good. Okay, so a mix. All right, the next question is if you do work in agriculture, how many years have you been working in agriculture? All right, great. So we have a few people with less than 1 year. I'd say about 50% has less than 1 year. And then 25% with 1 to 5 years, and 25% who have been working in agriculture for 6 to 15 years. And then the last one, this is just kind of a little fun activity as we get started, because we're going to be talking a lot today about conservation. So just what are some of the things, and you can type in more than one answer, what are some of the things that come to mind when you think about conservation, or things that, what does conservation mean to you, basically? Right, natural resources, great. Ecosystem preservation, environment, clean air. And I'll try to share this screen once everybody finishes up. I'll keep this one open 1 more minute if people want to continue putting in other words, or other people want to chime in. All right, and hopefully, all right, so hopefully you could see that word cloud. Dwayne, are you able to see that? Is that shared, the word cloud?
Yes, I could see it.
Okay, all right, great. So yeah, these are some of the things that people typed in, and these all are great, definitely all included in conservation. And as we'll be talking about today, conservation and sustainable agriculture is a really broad, encompassing topic that includes a lot of different things, to the point where when you're trying to figure out what kind of conservation practices are good fit for your land, it can become overwhelming. And so we're going to talk today about some of the available resources and people that can help kind of come up with a plan and help you determine what is a good fit for things or conservation practices to try out on your land or on your farm. All right, thank you everyone for participating there. I'm gonna go back. Hopefully you can now see the introduction slide again. And I'm not sure if people want to type in the chat. We did have a handful of farmers on the call. So if anybody does currently use conservation practices on your farm, if you want to just type in the chat, the types of things that you use or are trying. That would be great just to know what people are already using. I'll give it a minute there. And this question may not apply to everyone, so. Great. Setting up native pollinator habitat and rainwater collection system. Very good. Yep. All right, so I'm going to be talking during the first part of this presentation, and then Dwayne is going to be taking over and talking. But kind of what I plan to cover is an overview of some of the different types of conservation practices and the programs and agencies that do help provide technical and financial support. So I'm going to be giving a pretty broad overview, and then Dwayne will be talking about some of these practices in more details and really getting down to like the practical components. So our country has a history of involvement with conservation, and it really started, I'm sure you've heard about the Dust Bowl. So it really started, this bulletin here was from the late 1920s. And it is a bulletin put out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture saying soil erosion a national menace. So you could see some of these devastating effects of soil erosion and just how some of our early practices of farming kind of devastated the landscape after rain or wind erosion events. And it really, our policymakers really started to recognize that this is a major problem that affects our national security. And so in 1935, Congress passed a law in which it recognized that the wastage of soil and moisture resources on the farm, grazing, and forest lands is a menace to the national welfare. And that's when they established the Soil Conservation Service as a permanent agency. And then in 1994, the name was changed from the Soil Conservation Service to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. So you've probably heard of the NRCS, and that name change was just to recognize that conservation is a lot broader than just conserving soil. And so conservation really covers the soil, the land, the people, the air, the water. So all of these different resources that we depend on and agriculture depends on. So that's why they changed the name. And we're going to be talking about just a few, an overview of some of the different types of conservation practices that are out there. And actually there are, I think, 165 practices that are currently recognized on the NRCS. So according to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, there's a list of 165, and I'll show you how to look through that list. But these are just a few that we kind of picked out to highlight here. Cover crops, and Dwayne will be talking a lot more about them, but that's a great practice for sustainable agriculture. So when we talk about sustainable agriculture, that's just basically it's the idea that we're going to be able to continue farming that piece of land for extended periods of time, and we're not going to be degrading the land like we saw in some of those photos from the 1920s. So we want to do practices that will allow the land to maintain production and profitability. But yeah, so I like this photo here on the right. That's a daikon radish, which is used as a cover crop, and you can see how how deep that taproot goes down, and can help alleviate compaction. It can bring up nutrients from deep in the soil layers. So just all different kinds of benefits that the cover crops can provide. High tunnels, or they're also called hoop houses, is a really popular conservation practice there are programs with the Natural Resources Conservation Service that will help financially and technical support to build high tunnels and hoop houses. It's really good also for financial stability because they allow the season to be extended. So if you're growing vegetables or some other types of crops as well, you can now be growing your produce for a longer period out of the year. Tree plantings are a common conservation practice. And then we have things like gutters and rain barrels. So Crystal mentioned in the chat that she's using different rainwater collection systems on her operation. So a great way to conserve resources, conserve that water. A lot of times people will build water collection above to prevent the water from dropping into animal holding areas. So you're kind of providing two services in one there, whereas the water would fall into where the animals are and make things muddy and erode that soil there. Now we can not only divert that water, but also collect it and use it on another area of the property that needs that water. Buffer and pollinator strips. So another practice that can have multiple functions. So if you have a buffer strip, say on a contour that has pollinator species with it, you're not only helping to prevent erosion, but also encouraging there's pollinators, increasing your biodiversity, which can bring in all kinds of helpful organisms. So a really great practice there. Habitat. So there's different conservation programs that are targeted toward converting perhaps ag land into habitat. So that could be a conservation practice. There's different practices related to animals and manure. So animal mortality disposal, manure storage structures. So just covering that manure and putting it on a hard surface so that it's not running off of the farm. Putting concrete pads in heavy use areas. And I'll get into this later, but all of these practices can potentially you could get financial and technical support in your local region to put some of these practices into place if it applies to your operation. Silvopasture is when you have animals underneath of trees. So it's kind of you're making really good use of that land. You can use the trees. Some people harvest them for lumber or other wood products. Sometimes people have nut or fruit trees and then animals grazing underneath. The animals can benefit because they get shade. And then watering facilities could be another one related to animal production. There's conservation practices that help with pesticide to prevent pesticide contamination, keeping our water clean. Precision agriculture is another thing related to conservation that you can get support with. So if you are applying your nutrients and pesticides more precisely, just what the crop plant may need in that area, then you're conserving those nutrients and you're also saving yourself money. Along those same lines, soil testing and nutrient management. So making sure you know what nutrients your soil needs and not over applying and not under applying so that you can be sustainable for both your own profitability and also to prevent excess going into the environment. There's programs available to help transition to organic agriculture. So if you're currently in conventional agriculture and interested in transitioning, there is a 3-year transition period where you're going to be getting the prices for conventional, but having to do organic practices. And that can be really hard financially to get through those 3 years. So there's programs that can help with that transition period. And then this is the list that I mentioned, and we will share these slides with you after. So you could go to this website and kind of like scroll through 165 listed practices and kind of just click on the ones that you think may apply to you or you're interested in learning more about. But the caveat is that these are the national practice standards. And so it's a great thing to look through and kind of browse, but actually the practice standards are developed state by state. So it's a great thing to gain information, but if you're actually ready to do some of these practices on your farm, go into your local office for Soil Conservation District or your local NRCS office, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and then they will be able to tell you what practice standards apply to your state, because you'll need to meet all of their state and local criteria, which can be more restrictive than the national criteria that you'll see on this list. And in addition to all of these national practices that you can get technical and financial support with, there's also practices and programs that can be offered at both the state and local levels. And so, like, for example, I am in the Chesapeake Bay watershed region, and we have some conservation programs that are just available to those counties that fall within the Chesapeake Bay region. So your local office, your local NRCS or Soil Conservation District office will be able to kind of guide you in the right direction as well about your state or local opportunities. And then another key thing is that conservation programs provide both technical and or financial support. Some people are not eligible for the financial support. Other people are not interested in getting financial support. They don't want to have their strings attached to their practice, but everybody could still get free technical support. So you could still go in, talk to your local people, and get more information and technical support about that practice that you may be interested in without having to sign any kind of a contract or enter into a financial agreement. So the technical, and actually the Natural Resources Conservation Service, they started out by just providing that technical support. The financing came along later. So the Technical Assistance Program, again, provides knowledge and tools to farmers, ranchers, and forest land owners to conserve, maintain, and restore the natural resources on their land and improve the health for the future. It is free to everyone, and it is open and accessible to everyone. So anybody can go and ask for that support. And the goal is to give one-on-one personalized advice and information based on the latest science and research to help producers make informed decisions. You can also get a conservation plan written by your local NRCS for free. And that, again, it's not involved with any kind of a financial agreement or a contract. That is a free service provided by the US government. So you can, they will work with you to develop the conservation plan, and those experts will suggest conservation practices that can help reach your production and conservation goals. So you go in there, I mean, it's a great idea to kind of review the different practices ahead of time, but you go in there with your ideas and then they can help further develop those ideas or give you additional ideas about what may be a good fit on your land. And then there's the financial support level. So a lot of farmers are interested in getting that financial help, and you can apply for the financial assistance to get help installing the conservation practices outlined in your conservation plan. So they will always do the plan first, and then you can apply for the financial support. And we like to tell people that no matter the size of your farm or operation, there should be conservation practices that can fit. Because again, we want the farming operation to be sustainable and to go into the future, and conservation goes hand in hand in that. So how do we start to think about conservation and fitting conservation into our whole farm plan? So it's a good idea to kind of brainstorm and even write things down. Do you have a particular problem on your farm that you would like to fix? Do you have something on your property that could be enhanced? The Natural Resource Conservation Service can help with identifying conservation objectives and assessing and analyzing the natural resources issues on your land related to all of these things. So again, we've expanded, or they have expanded beyond just soil. And so it's related to soil, water, animals, and that could be farm animals or wildlife, plants, air, energy, and human interaction. There's more information here. Again, we'll share these slides where if you want to learn more about conservation plans. And then there's some good questions to have in mind when you are getting started. So again, you could brainstorm, write these down. What are the natural resources on my farm? So just thinking about, what do you already have that you could enhance? What crops do I plan to grow? Have I minimized runoff? Could I be doing better with that? What types of wildlife do I want to encourage? Maybe you want to try to incorporate some practices that will bring more biodiversity to your farm, whether that be plants or insect biodiversity, animals, a certain type of bird that you would like to encourage. Am I rotating crops to reduce disease and pest problems? So a lot of these conservation practices go hand in hand with your crop production issues or things that you're trying to achieve with your crop production. Can I improve the management of forest resources? So maybe you have a piece of property that has a bit that's farmed, but a lot of forest on that property as well. What could you be doing to improve that forest on your property? And again, the conservation plan is just a tool to help you better manage some of those things, and to have an outside party kind of look at your operation and give some ideas about what may be a good fit. And it's free. And you don't have to take any of their advice. So if you get it done and you don't agree, there's no strings attached to that. So basically, if you do that, you'll get a list of management practices that are recommended, a timeline for implementing the practices, and they also will include aerial and soil maps of your farm. So the conservation plan would look something like this. So on this operation, the practices that they recommended were crop rotation, cover crop, and diversion. The diversion is to construct a channel across the slope with an embankment on the lower side to divert water from its natural flow. So on this particular operation, those were what they recommended. Also, nutrient management was a recommended practice. Brush management. So they'll get, and it's pretty specific. So looking at your property, they look at the exact fields and the acreage and the months that you would do this practice. And then here's the farm map that they would provide in your conservation plan, as well as the soil map. And we could talk more about Web Soil Survey, but basically the soil map is on Web Soil Survey, and you could Google that, and it just tells you the different types of soil on your property, and you can click on the different areas and learn more. So some of these may be a sandier soil versus more clayey, or a wetter soil, or a soil that has very good drainage versus bad drainage. So you could just learn a lot more about the different soils, and therefore kind of put the conservation practices where they make sense based on the type of soil you have. So as far as the plan writing process, again, you want to contact your local soil conservation district or NRCS office. So here in Maryland, these often are in the same building and they work hand in hand, as well as our state people. Like, so the Maryland Department of Ag people will work very closely with the federal people to kind of give you that one stop shop. Then a technician will visit your farm and they'll ask about the crops grown, take a look and ask about any kind of conservation concerns. They may notice, oh, you don't have gutters on your barn roof. You have a bare pasture. So just kind of looking for ideas about how it could be improved. And then they'll also ask about your input. They'll write your plan, they review it with you. It goes to the district board for approval. And then you can install and maintain the practices according to the plan. Again, you're not required or obligated to do that unless you apply and get the financial support. So I'm going to go through here briefly, just a little introduction to the national programs that are offered. If you do end up trying to get involved with these, then these names will at least be familiar. So within the Natural Resources Conservation Service, one of the really big programs is known by the name EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, but a lot of times people call it EQIP. And that is where you could find high tunnels, a lot of a whole laundry list of different conservation practices can be grouped within that program. There are other programs, agriculture management assistance. That's a program kind of to help reduce risk on the farm. And sometimes it gets quite confusing because sometimes a particular practice, such as high tunnels, may fall within both of these programs. So it's great just to kind of go into your office and talk to them about what is available and what program is a good fit for you. The Conservation Stewardship Program, that is more geared toward people that are already doing a conservation practice, but they want to go to the next level. So maybe they're already cover cropping, but they want to get more benefits out of their cover cropping and are thinking about a multi-species cover crop or an extended season cover crop. So then the Conservation Stewardship Program may be a good fit for them, kind of going from level 1 to level 2. And then the Farm Service Agency has a few programs, and these tend to be longer term contracts. So this would be like converting farmland to wetland or to buffer. And so these programs tend to have like 10 to 15 year contracts, whereas a lot of the EQIP programs are kind of like 1 or 2 year contracts. So for beginning farmers, and especially if you're not sure, you're kind of fluid as far as what land you have, or maybe you don't own the land, you're renting the land, then the shorter programs, shorter term contracts may be a better fit. But even if you are renting the land, you can still apply and get financial support for these programs. Just be aware that you'll just have to have that conversation with the person you talk to about renting it. But they will make a contract with somebody who's renting and doesn't own. So the EQIP is their flagship program for the NRCS. A lot of people will enter into that program. It can provide both the financial and technical assistance, and it kind of addresses all of these conservation areas. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but things related to water and air quality, soil health, improving or creating wildlife habitat, helping mitigate against drought. So all different kind of goals for those conservation practices. Important to note that these programs do not pay to start up a farming operation. So a lot of times we'll have people call our office or call next door to the Soil Conservation District office and say, I want a grant to start farming. That's not what they do. These are geared toward installing conservation practices on a person's property who has already started farming. So for example, they won't pay for animals, but if you have animals, they can provide support to help manage those animals. There's programs to help with organic and transitioning farmers, high tunnels, grazing programs. These are all within the EQIP program. Converting cropland to pasture. So EQIP will pay for planting and fencing. If you say have a cornfield and you want to convert that to pasture, if your field is already in hay, then EQIP will help with overseeding or renovation, but not fencing. So again, talk to your local people to figure out what would be the case for you. It's very technical, a lot of details. And then historically underserved participants are eligible for advance payments to help offset costs related to purchasing materials or contracting services through EQIP. So there is the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, or the 2018 Farm Bill, which is commonly called, includes provisions that address the unique circumstances and concerns of socially disadvantaged, beginning, limited resource, and veteran farmers and ranchers. And the United States Department of Agriculture classifies or defines historically underserved producers as those groups that I just listed. And they have a website here that you could go to kind of determine whether you fall into one of the criteria for being in their definition a historically underserved farmer or rancher. And if so, then they have extra kind of, sometimes they'll provide historically underserved farmers with a higher rate. So with a non-historically underserved farmer, they may provide for 70% of the cost, but with a historically underserved farmer for a particular practice, they may provide 100% of the cost, or they may provide advance payments versus if you are not in that category, then you would have to wait till after you paid for the installation and then send them their bill. So there's some different provisions that could be different. So again, another thing to do some research on your own, check online, go into the office informed, but then also ask about it when you go into the office. Again, there are some programs that are not federal, but unique to particular states. So like here in Maryland, we have some programs to help plant trees. We have a program specific for small acreage cover crops. So there's a larger acreage cover crop program as well, but that didn't apply well to some of our smaller growers. So recently they started a new program with a different cost structure just for small acreage growers. So here you could see cover crops growing within a high tunnel. And then there's urban agriculture, water, and power grants. These are unique to Maryland, but whatever state you live in, check your state, and you may have programs as well and opportunities. And then I think this is my last slide here. I know I've thrown out a lot of acronyms, different agencies, and different programs. So this slide, and you could look over it in more detail when you get the slides, but it kind of tells you all of the different agencies that are involved and what their different roles are. So Dwayne and I work for Cooperative Extension through the university. We do research, applied research, and education. We don't actually run any of these programs. The U.S. Farm Service Agency and the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, they're the ones providing the technical and financial support for these different programs, as well as the Department of Agriculture. They run some programs. They also provide some regulatory things and marketing help. The Soil Conservation District is where you would go a lot of times to sign up for a program. And they work very closely with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service to provide that technical assistance in the planning. And then there's the Farm Bureau, which provides representation and lobbying support, but not so much the actual program. So it kind of just breaks that down a bit. And then my last slide here before I move it over to Dwayne, and I'm happy to take questions as well, is just my contact information. If you have a chance and could rate my teaching, and I know Dwayne would love you to rate his teaching as well. We are required to get teaching evaluations since we work for the university, so you could go to that website or just scan that QR code and then select each of our names and rate our teaching. We would really appreciate that. So I'm going to stop sharing and give it over to Dwayne. But first, do we have any questions? I don't know if you want to, if anybody does, please put it in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute if you're able to. Share.
Any questions, Sarah? Did you see any?
I don't see any.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can, Dwayne.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, so kind of go into a little bit more technical stuff, kind of seeing cover crops and conservation, sustainable type practices in action. So I'm gonna cover, just a little bit of some ways if you plan on using cover crops on your property, on your farm, in your production, and also ways that it could help. And kind of get a little more technical, kind of go through one or two different projects on farm research projects that I've done and I've been a part of, that kind of highlights, the importance and kind of shows how these conservation practices actually work in real life. So this is a slide I often like to put in whenever I talk about conservation or pest management, integrated pest management. And what this is basically I like to kind of liken it to using a toolbox, right? You have a toolbox that's filled with different methods, and you use all these methods to tackle your different pest problems, right? So instead of just relying on one tool, you combine as many strategies as possible. And the goal is to manage pests effectively while using fewer chemical inputs, right? The main reason for having an integrated pest management plan is to reduce the reliance on chemicals, mainly insecticides, herbicides, fungicides. And, with the increased use of these chemical inputs, what we find is a lot of herbicide or pesticide resistance. So by having a holistic plan where you use different methods or different tactics, you are able to just slow down the evolution of herbicide resistance. So if we look at mechanical means, sorry, we have hand weeding or mowing cultivation practices, trapping, like I mentioned earlier, chemicals, insecticides, any of the sides, herbicides, fungicides, nematicides. If we also look at biological aspects, we have predators, and I'm gonna hit a little bit about those further down on the slides. Parasitoids, herbivory, genetics, and also cultural practices. And that's mainly what Sarah spoke about earlier, right? So we have trap cropping, crop rotation, polyculture. But what we're going to kind of hit on a little bit harder is cover cropping and how we could use cover cropping as a part of our integrated pest management plan. So the question is, what is a cover crop, right? So I know we have a couple farmers in here. So you guys should know what a cover crop is. Like I said, Sarah kind of hinted on what cover crops are. So what they are basically plants that are grown to protect or improve the soil rather than for harvest, right? So we don't harvest the cover crop, we harvest the cash crop. Also cover crops are planted during the off season or between our main crops. So you want to ask yourself why should you grow a cover crop, right? So there's so many different benefits of cover crops. One is to prevent soil erosion. Sarah spoke about the Dust Bowl in the 1920s. If they had cover crops, if they used cover crops, we wouldn't have that issue. Um, Another one that's kind of dear to my heart is suppress weeds. A lot of my work, a lot of my research looks at how cover crops can suppress weeds and control weeds on your farms. Um, Also, when it comes to enhancing soil fertility, cover crops are really good at that. They promote beneficial soil microorganisms. They're really good when it comes to soil health. And also they attract pollinators and beneficial insects. So I saw in the chat earlier that some people have beneficial insect habitat, pollinator habitats. So cover crops are really good at attracting those pollinators and beneficial insects. So when it comes to cover crops, they are blends, right? So it's not mainly just using one cover crop. We always push for having a blend and having that diversity. So it's like multitaskers for your field, right? So they let you achieve multiple goals with just one planting. So if you use multiple cover crops, you use a mix, you could get all these benefits from one planting. So for example, a mix might improve your soil health. It will suppress weeds and it will also attract beneficials all at the same time. Compared to if you just use one species of cover crop. So within a mix, and mixes can get really crazy. Up to the way 12-way mixes. I've heard of 12-way mixes. But you always want to have those three main categories or these three main species in your mix, right? Legumes are one, so like a veg, clover, peas, beans. These are really good to have in a mix. Also in your mix, you want to have any grasses, or cereals. Think of rye, oats, wheat, barley. And also in that mix, you want to have some brassicas in there, right? So Sarah showed earlier some tillage radish, with that nice little root with the soil profile. These are very good in a mix. Also canola or rape seeds. These are also good. Brassicas to include in your mix, and also mustards are really good to have in your mixes also. So you decide to give cover cropping a try, right? But you aren't really sure where to start. So I will go through some questions that you could ask yourself. So like basically 4 questions that you ask yourself and that could help you can be a guide basically to make an informed or educated decision on what the right type of cover crops for the needs that you see on your farm or on your production. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, what is your goal for the cover crop, right? Depending on, that question, what goal you have, you could pick the right, mix, or you could pick the right cover crop, based on that question. Another question you want to ask yourself is, what cash crop will follow your cover crop? So that'll be a good way for you to decide, what exactly. So you could pick something that basically wouldn't antagonize whatever cash crop that you're gonna follow with that after that cover crop. The third question that you want to ask yourself is, how are you going to establish the cover crop, right? So you figured out, hey, I have a goal. I figure out, what will follow, what cash crop will follow this cover crop. Now you're gonna ask yourself, how am I gonna establish that cover crop? And the final question you want to ask yourself is, how are you going to terminate that cover crop? So you don't want that cover crop to turn into a weed, so you need to terminate it. When I say terminate, is basically to kill or to stop that cover crop from growing. So each one of these questions in the next couple slides, I kind of answer each one of these questions, so you'll be able to figure out exactly the best cover crop for whatever needs you have on your production or on your farm. So if you're dealing with compacted soils or you're interested in biofumigation, so brassicas can be a great choice for your cover crop, right? So like I mentioned earlier, options like radishes, canola, and mustards, they have very deep tap roots that can break up compacted layers in the soil. And they also release natural compounds that help suppress soil pests and also diseases. So if you have some compacted soils, you want to also have some brassicas in that mix. If you're looking to boost nitrogen levels in your soil and you want to do that naturally, and as a farmer, everybody wants to boost nitrogen in their soils, especially if you're an organic farmer. Legumes are the way to go with this, right? So you want to plant legumes like peas, beans, clovers, and also veg. And what these do is they basically fix any nitrogen from the soil, so they from the atmosphere. They take all that nitrogen that's in the atmosphere and they kind of fix it and bring it down into the soil where your cash crop can kind of basically benefit from that. So if you want to boost nitrogen levels, then legumes is a definite species you want in your mix. When it comes to weed suppression, and weeds are always on the top three list when it comes to limiting factors in crop production. So when it comes to weed suppression, plants cereals are really good at suppressing weeds. So rye, wheat, barley, oats, these are really good options. And the main mechanism of operation for these cereals in suppressing weeds is that they grow really quickly. They get a lot of biomass, so they could get a lot of biomass. And with that biomass, what happens is it basically covers up the soil and it suppresses any emergence of weeds, right? So by covering up the soil, it prevents any of those stimuli from the sun that gets onto the soil that kind of allows or kind of hints at weed seeds to germinate. So if you want weed suppression, you want to have some cereals or some grasses in your mix. And finally, if you want to attract pollinators, especially during the summer, you want to consider planting like a buckwheat or clover, right? So something with a nice flower that's very attractive to these pollinators and to these beneficial insects. So you're planning to, if you plan to direct seed your cash crop, you want to basically avoid using any high biomass cereal cover crop. So anything like rye or wheat, you want to stay away from that. And that's mainly because they leave behind a lot of residue, like especially where we are in Maryland, in the mid-Atlantic, for some reason, we have really good climate. We have really good temperatures for a lot of biomass accumulation from especially cereal, rye, and different grass or cereal cover crops. So if you want to direct seed, you want to avoid these high biomass, or you want to terminate them early. And that's mainly because they produce so much residue, they will make it hard for, whatever equipment you have to work effectively. And also for your seeds to come up and for your seeds to establish. So and then if you transplant in your cover crop, if you're transplanting your cash crop, sorry, you want to have a mulch from a cover crop, and that could be very helpful. So direct seeding, you want to stay away from the high biomass cereal rise, but if you're transplanting, these are very beneficial, right? So you could terminate, you could kill that rye, lay it down nice and flat, and then you'd get this nice thick mulch that would suppress weeds, but then you can transplant straight into that. And what will happen is you would give your cash crop an advantage about 3 to 4, 5 weeks, depending on what weeds you have in your field. You'd give your cash crop an advantage over those weeds. So when you look at establishing your cover crop, so again, you want to look at how are you going to establish your cover crop. Either you direct seed it if you have the equipment to, that would be the best. But you know, direct seeding equipment can be, you know, very expensive. So another option is to broadcast or rake in, which is, you know, less not labor intensive, but it's cheaper, less inputs. But with that, you want to ensure that you get a good seed to soil contact. So if you're direct seeding, you could go basically at, you know, whatever recommended rates that you find. But when you broadcast, you want to up that to about 25% more than the direct seeding rate. And that's to basically compensate for a lot of those seeds not coming up. Another good practice when it comes to cover crops, before you plant them, you want to prime them. And what that is basically you want to soak them in water, or if you have a compost tea, depending on how big your operation is, you want to prime those seeds first, right? So when we look at small seeds like clovers, you want to prime those for about 4 to 8 hours. So clovers, brassicas, those small seededs, they don't need to be primed as long. And what priming does basically is allows that seed to imbibe or kind of take up a lot of that water, and that would help it when it comes to germination. If you have a medium-sized seed, like let's say a rye or oats, you want to prime them between 12 to 28 hours. And as the seeds get larger, basically what happens is you want to prime them for longer. So if you have a large seed like a pea or beans, you want to prime them between 18 and 24 hours. So you want to prime for about a full day. And it all depends on the size of the seed and the size of the seed, and also the seed coat, how hard that seed coat is on that cover crop seed. So you established your cover crop is growing. Now you're ready to plant your cash crop, and you need to terminate, or you need to kill that cover crop, right? So we don't want that cover crop competing, becoming a weed, or competing with our cash crop. So, excuse me, we want to figure out a way to terminate it. A very common and easy way is to mow. You could mow it, push mower, depending on the size of your operation, bush hog, flail mower. Also you could mow and then tarp it. You can smash it down. So you could get like a T-post and just smash everything down. That's also effective. Also, if you have a roller crimper, if you have, you know, if you're established, you have some money, you know, make some investments, you could get a roller crimper. And what that is basically it's a big I kind of liken it to a rolling pin, like you would make you would do with bacon. And what it would do is it would basically push down, you'd attach it to the front or the back of a tractor or whatever implement you have, and it would basically push down and knock down that cover crop. If you do it at the right timing, at the right growth stage, it would kill cover crop. So if you think of a cereal right before they call it anthesis, when it just starts flowering, if you roller crimp it, that would kill it. If you roller crimp it before that, it will pop right back up. So that's a little bit more consideration depending on what type of cover crop you have, and that termination timing. Tillage is also a good method to terminate your cover crop. A lot of brassicas, they winter kill, and what that is once it gets to a certain temperature, they would naturally die off. So that's good. And then, you know, if nothing works, you could always use chemicals to terminate, herbicides to terminate your cover crop. So there are two main ways that we use cover crops in our research. So one is a living mulch, and these are low-growing cover crops that grow alongside your cash crop. So it grows together with your cash crop. It reduces weed pressure. So if you look at this picture on the left, you could see there's no weeds in there. It's all red clover. It conserves soil moisture, so it protects the soil from evaporation. So think about that versus nothing covering the soil. You'll have a lot of evaporation really quickly. And also being a a clover, legume, it improves our soil structure, right? Another method, another way that we could use, that we use cover crops are as a dye and mulch. And that basically refers to a cover crop that is terminated. So if you go back to the previous slide about termination, that's what it leads to, right? You have a dye and mulch. And what that is the residue stays in place. It suppresses weeds, it retains soil moisture, and it reduces erosion, soil erosion, right? It also improves organic matter in the soil. So one drawback to dye and mulch is that it provides early season weed control, but like you would imagine, depending on the amount of rainfall, depending on the weather, it could disintegrate, or it could erode over time. So that's something you want to think about. You know, if do I want to use it as a dye and mulch? Do I want to use it as a living mulch? So a little bit more about a dye and mulch or terminated mulch. So again, it's grown and terminated prior to or after cover crop planting. Crop planting, your cash crop planting, sorry. It suppresses weed growth by acting as a soil cover. So you think of it like the name implies, a mulch. It also prevents soil moisture, it retains soil, it prevents soil erosion, sorry, retains soil moisture, and also it will reduce herbicide input. So you would have, you know, that as an integrated plan, an integrated method. So you'd use that, and by whatever weeds that come up through that won't be as much as if there weren't any cover crop or any mulch on there. So with that, it helps reduce any herbicides that you're going to use. Again, a living mulch, grown between an established cash crop. It goes together with the cash crop, so it grows together with the crop during the season, suppresses weeds, prevents soil erosion, improves soil structure. Another one that's really good is it promotes biodiversity. And I'm gonna hint a lot of that in the some of the applied research that we do. And also it enhances beneficial insect habitats. So living mulches that we're interested in, a lot of my research for the past couple of years, I've been looking at red clover as a living mulch. And the reason why we look at red clover is because it's really fast growing, right? So it doesn't get too tall. It's fast growing. We plant it in the fall, it overwinters, and then in the spring it will be the first thing up. So it grows really fast. It's pollinator friendly. It has all these nice flowers that pollinators like. Fixes nitrogen. Again, it's a legume. Not live competitive, so it doesn't grow too tall depending on what crop you're using. You could use it. It could be a really good companion crop. Improve soil structure. And there's not much research that's done on it, right? So like I said, the past couple of years we've been doing a lot of research on it, but there's not a lot of work going into looking at red clover as a living mulch. So with that, I was part of a lab when I was a postdoc at main campus, University of Maryland main campus in College Park. And I worked under Sir Rudy Hooks. His lab pumps out a lot of integrated management, conservation, sustainable type work. He's an entomologist by trade. So a lot of work that comes out of his lab kind of looks at using sustainable practices. So one of these practices, one of his grad students, Hannah, looked at was having diversity. So I know Sarah kind of hinted on diversity when she spoke, but having more than one crop in the system, in the cropping system, is very beneficial, right? So what Hannah found is that when she grew a cash crop with a cover crop, a living mulch, versus when she only grew a monoculture or only that cash crop, she saw a lot of differences in natural enemies, weed suppression, and different stuff. So one of the main takeaways she found from her research, her master's work, was that by having more than one plant, so plant diversity, so having a cash crop and also a cover crop or a living mulch, it reduced herbivores in cucurbit crops, right? So cucurbit crops are like cucumbers, cantaloupe, these types of crops, where striped cucumber beetles are very it's a very invasive pest of cucurbits. And what Hannah found is that in her plots where she had living mulch, versus a plot where she didn't have a living mulch, she found that there were less cucurbit or cucumber beetles in those crops that had that living mulch. Also, another thing that Hannah found in her research was that that with plant diversity, it boosts predators like big-eyed and pirate bugs. So again, when she had a living mulch in those plots where she had a living mulch and a cash crop, she found more predators. And that's good because these predators kill or they prey on different pests or different animals or insects that would be detrimental to yield and to basically your cash crop. So planting diversity, having living mulch with a cash crop was very beneficial. So this past couple years, one of um one of the grad students in the Hooks Lab, Leo Kerner, he's been working with reducing herbicide inputs, right? So he's been looking at um using living mulches, using cover crops to reduce herbicides in cantaloupe. So one of the objectives of his study was to develop a system that uses a living mulch and strip tillage, and that's a conservation tillage method, and soft herbicides. So what soft herbicides are is basically organic or lower impact herbicides, so mainly organic herbicides. And he was looking at that to manage weeds and also to suppress insect pests, and promote beneficial arthropods. So getting a little technical, so to understand his results, we need to kind of understand how the study was set up. So what he did was he had two big plots. We call them whole plots. So in one plot, he looked at having a monoculture, so just that cash crop, and in between the rows, we didn't grow anything. So he looked at a standard input that would be basically what a normal cantaloupe farmer would use, so a pre-herbicide, so basically two different herbicide timings. And then he looked at a reduced input. So he looked at using a herbicide only once and only using organic herbicide. And then on the other whole plot, he looked at to compare diversity. So he looked at using a living mulch and also using that cash crop. So growing that living mulch in between those cash crop rows. So I know it's Wednesday. You guys didn't expect to see graphs today, right? But so I'll kind of explain what's going on here. So we look at arthropod predators and pest abundance. So like I mentioned earlier, you want to see predators. So predators are good when it comes to you want to see those in your plots because those attack and those feed off of your pest. So the higher the predators, the better. So what Leo found in his plots was that if you look over here, and on the y-axis, going up here, we have just the weed abundance, the pest abundance, sorry. And on the x-axis, we have the black plastic showed this is the monoculture plots, and then where you see the red clover is the living mulch plots. Where you see that little man spraying is the ones where they used the herbicides. And without is where they used the softer herbicides. Basically what you could take home from this is that predators, which are on the blue bars, we see higher number of predators in our living mulch plots versus pests in our living mulch plots. So that's good. We want to see that. If we look at our strike spotted cucumber beetles, and these are pests. If we look at in our diversity plots or with our living mulches, we could see that we have way less pests versus when they just did monoculture. So they grew it on plastic. They didn't have any living mulch in between. So that's good. So detrivores, if you guys don't know, not if you guys not really into entomology, these are beneficials and they play a critical role in breaking down soils, and breaking down and recycling organic matter in the soil. So again, when we look at our monoculture plots, we have way less detritivores than when we look at our living mulch plots. And again, we want to see more detritivores because these are kind of like an indicator of good soil health. So having diversity, we have a higher abundance of detritivores. One more graph for you guys. So if we look at epigeal predators and parasitoids, and what these parasitoids are basically, like the name says, these are insects that are they kind of lay their eggs, so they are parasites of other pests, right? So they're good. So we want to see them higher. And also predators, we want to see them, these predators, epigeal predators, are those that kind of roam the soil surface, roam the ground, and kind of feed on pests. So if you think of like spiders, ants, certain ground beetles, these are all epigeal predators. Going back to our plots again, when we have diversity with a living mulch, we have a higher occurrence of both parasitoids and epigeal predators. So that's good. So moving on to weeds, weed suppression. And again, from these pictures here, you could clearly see right here on the left, this is our plasticulture. So that's where they grew it on black plastic with no. So that's our monoculture plots. You can see all these grasses in here, versus over here where we had our polyculture, where we had our living mulch and our cash crop growing together. So you could see the difference when it comes to weed suppression. So that kind of translated in the results we saw, right? So again, if you look here, in our living mulch plots, we had way less weeds. We kind of broke those weeds down into broadleafs and grasses. We'd see we have way more weeds in the monoculture, the plasticulture plots versus when we had our living mulch. Something we didn't want to see and we're kind of working on fixing is, regardless of what we did, we still got higher yields in the monoculture versus our living mulch plots. So, when I saw this this little cartoon, it kind of explains, kind of captures what we see going on, right? As a farmer, it's not even a starter if you want to have reduced yields, right? But as researchers, we don't have that pressure for yield as a farmer do. So we could, basically, play along, research, do all these different type of methods so that we could basically recommend different practices. So with the reason why we think we saw these reduced yields versus the monoculture is one, we think our row in where we grew our cash crop was a little narrow. So in the next year, we're going to expand on how wide we strip till and we grow within that row. And also we're going to kind of find a clover that grows a little lower to the ground. So again, we used a cucurbit. If you're familiar with cucurbits, they're viney. So that wasn't really, beneficial. That didn't show a lot there was a lot of interaction with the yield. But if we grow something like a pepper or something, eggplant, something that's tall, that stands, then we wouldn't see those differences. So You know, that's why we as researchers, we spend so much time kind of evaluating and seeing what works so that we could make the right recommendations for farmers. So I'm just gonna go through this one last study. So with this study, we use cover crops, but we didn't use them in the fall. We use them in the spring. So we spring seeded these cover crops in between plastic rows. So in this study, we looked at plastic culture. So we found that there's a big problem if any of you have grown, if any of you have used plastic, grown on plastic or plastic culture before, you know there's a problem with weeds growing between those rows, right? So whatever you leave bare, weeds are going to exploit. So that was one of the problems we saw. Also, there's also an issue. So if you have those weeds in between those rows, you're going to go through with a cultivator or mowing or whatever manual practices, and then there's issues because you risk ripping up the plastic, right? And also when it comes to herbicides, there are not many herbicides that are registered for vegetable crops. So, and with using those, there's also a risk of herbicide injury. So with that, we came up with some objectives. So we wanted to assess the impact of the cover crop on weed suppression. We also wanted to evaluate cover crops for reducing herbicide applications, again, integrated management. So we want to reduce the reliance on herbicides. And also we want to demonstrate that cover crops can be used in a plastic culture system. So two of the main cover crops we used were spring oats and also cereal rice. So these two grass cover crops, we use them mainly because of the ability to produce biomass, especially with spring oats. It could produce biomass really quickly in the spring. With cereal rye, when it's planted in the spring, it doesn't produce as much biomass as when it's planted in the fall. But research has shown that cereal rye is allelopathic, and what that means is that wherever it grows, it releases chemicals in the ground that prevents other weeds from growing. So wherever there's cereal rye, sometimes you only find cereal rye in there, and that's because it releases chemicals into the soil that prevents other plants from growing there. So we had our study was very technical. We had different factors. It was a factorial study. So I won't bore you with all the technical stuff. Again, sorry for the graphs. But that's the only way we could kind of bring across the point of what we're seeing. What just happened. Okay. So we're looking at weed density. And also cover crop type, right? So on our x-axis here, we have plants. So we went through and we looked at the amount of weeds or the amount of plants we had in the plots. On our x-axis, we just have the different cover crops that we use. So we have oats, rye, and then we had a mixture of oats and rye. And then one of our plots, we didn't have any cover crops. So that was our control to see what would happen without any cover crops. And these two, so we looked at first at 4 weeks after transplanting. So that's when we terminated our cover crops. And then we looked at it 7 weeks after transplanting. So that's kind of far along in the season. So what's the takeaway from this here is basically, regardless of what cover crop we grew, we got a very significant amount, significant reduction in weeds versus when we didn't have any cover crop. So that's showing that, cover crops are suppressing weeds. So if you look at weed density versus termination time and residual herbicides. So I forgot to mention that with these plots, the way we terminated them, the cover crops, if you remember from the earlier slides, there are different ways to terminate. So we kind of evaluated those different ways of terminating and seeing which one was best. So we used clethodim, which is a grass herbicide, paraquat, which is a broad spectrum herbicide, so it would kill everything. And then we also used roller crimping, where we didn't use any chemicals. So when we look at weed density, we didn't have any significant difference statistically, but we could see that when we use paraquat, that broad spectrum herbicide that would kill everything, it kind of had the lowest amount of weeds. And then also we added a residual herbicide. And what a residual herbicide is, it basically is a chemical mulch, I would say. So it protects the soil, it kind of basically forms a chemical covering over the soil that prevents weeds from emerging for about up to 5 weeks, depending on soil type and also you know, how wet the soil is. So what we found is that when we added a residual to the mix, we got way less weeds versus when we didn't have a residual in the mix. So what is important to many farmers is yield, right? So when we looked at yield, we found that, and the cover crop we used there was watermelon, and we also did this in peppers and also cucumbers, but I'll just report on the watermelons here. And what we found is that when we had oats or rye, we had a significantly higher amount of yield versus when we had no cover crop or we had the mixture. And also when we looked at the way we terminated our cover crop, we found that with paraquat, we had the highest yields. So terminating with paraquat and either oats or rye cover crop, we got really high yields. So finally, I'll just go through kind of buttoning everything up and looking at how, you know, another way that we use these cover crops in our plots, and that can be translated to your farm, either large scale, small scale, is basically using an integrated approach, right? So when you think about controlling weeds in fields, there's always 2 areas that you want to focus on, right? Between the row, and that's between where you plant your cash crop, and within the row, and that's where you plant your cash crop. So if you look at this picture here, you could see this mixture. So the low lying here is the living mulch, and that's a red clover. The taller is cereal rye, and that's basically about April, May, right before we terminate, and we transplant our cash crop. And what we would do is at anthesis, we would come with a big roller crimper and roll down the whole plot. And what would happen is we would terminate that rye, and it wouldn't terminate the clover, but it would suppress it, it would knock it back for a while. And then what we would do is, after, we would come in, lay our drip tape, and then we would plant our cash crop. So here, I think that's okra. So we plant our cash crop in between there. What we found is that's excellent. If you look here, you don't see any weeds. That gives us some weed suppression for, you know, up to 5 to 6 weeks, again, depending on you know, your weed density in the soil, your weed pressure. And another way we've used cover crops in between, like, you know, separating the within row and between row areas, is using a strip till, which is a conservation tillage method. So we just strip till in between, so it grow a whole field of living mulch, clover, strip till, and then when we're ready to plant, we just transplant straight in there. That's another way you could go if using a living mulch. Another way too is, like I mentioned earlier, you could put a plastic. So you could put plastic down or a tarp, and then you could grow straightly, like direct transplant straight into that, poke those holes and seed transplant straight in there. Another method we're looking at is solarization, and then there's another method called biosolarization, which I can't get into right now, but we're looking at basically mix and matching these integrated management practices with cover crops to basically control weeds and also to suppress pests. So this is kind of a picture of what it looks like. So here we have a summer squash, and here you could see that residue. And that residue is probably 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks old, and it's still holding back the weeds. So it works pretty good. So what did we learn? I know I spoke a lot. You guys probably fell asleep on me, but thanks for staying with me. So what did we learn? So in our watermelon study, we found out cover crops, the presence of cover crops, it boosts our yield and weed control. And also, when we terminated with paraquat, we got the best weed control. And also applying a residual herbicide in that mix, also was really good with weed control. In our red clover, living mulch in our cantaloupe study, we found that our living mulch, we had way more beneficials in there and a lot less pest. And also we found that the red clover in our living mulch reduced a lot of weeds. And also, which again, we still working on fixing, living mulch plots sadly had lower yields versus our conventional plots. So with that, I think that's it for me, Sarah and Ron. Hopefully I didn't go over the time. I could take any questions if anybody has questions.
There was one question from Crystal, but then she said she had to jump off to another course.
Okay.
But I copied it if you want to email her. She did leave her email address, so.
Can I please? Okay, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, I could do that. You're
So
welcome.
that's what we had planned today as far as our presentation. But again, as Dwayne said, we're happy to take any questions or if anybody has anything other things they wanted to discuss before we hop off. We're
Yeah,
happy to.
we could take any questions if anybody has any practices they think we should look into. Like I said, we could, the good thing about being with the university and with research and extension is that we don't have, that pressure to produce yield. So we could try, whatever stuff you guys think would work. We could try that out. We could try that out for you, see if it works, and at no cost to you. And we could give recommendations based on that. So if anybody has any questions, I could put my email in the chat. Or you guys could get in contact with Ron if okay. Yeah, I guess my email only comes up to host and panelists. It doesn't go out to everyone. So I try to hit to everyone. It doesn't go out. So maybe
Yeah, for
Ron.
some reason there's a setting where Dwayne and I can only like send a message to each other, but not to
Right.
the group.
So Ron, I put my email in there. So if you could put it out to the group. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Again, if anybody has any recommendations and stuff they think that we should be looking at, I'll be glad to look at that too.
Dwayne, there's a question now in the chat for you.
Is there somewhere else to obtain the information on outcomes of the cover crop testing? I don't think I fully understand the question. Outcomes as in the stuff we've been working on, or outcomes as in just general stuff that's out there about different beneficial cover crops? I don't, did you understand the question, Sarah? Cover crop testing? Oh, okay, there it
Oh,
goes. The outcome for the file, would you not want to? Yeah. So like I said, that's why, we do the research we do. It didn't work with cantaloupe. Well, it worked with, the main metrics we were looking at, but as a farmer, yield, as a researcher, yield is not, the top thing we look at when we have our objectives. But again, depends on the type of crop you use, right? So because it was a cucurbit, it's low lying on the ground, so then you would get some competition. But if we used, and we've used it in other studies, I just don't have, we just haven't compiled all the data yet. But when we use it on like, taller like eggplants and peppers and tomatoes, stuff that you stake or stuff that's upright, then we don't see that yield drag or that yield, we don't see that yield loss as substantial as we saw with the cucurbit. So, that's one of the reasons. And another reason too is, again, our row would make our row a little wider. And also next year we look at using more of a white clover. So a white clover wouldn't grow as tall, it would stay a little lower to the ground. But to see how, it wouldn't have as much, it wouldn't produce as much leaves or bigger leaves like a red clover would, but again, we, evaluating to see which one works best. Yeah, hopefully I answered that question. I think that question is for you, Ron.
Yes, I'll forward out the slide deck as well as recording everyone. Well, Sarah and Dwayne, looks like I guess there are no more questions. I thank both of you for joining us and sharing your information with us. I'll forward out your slide deck when I get them from you, and as well as recording, and then I'll forward out to you the follow-up survey as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Well, Sarah and Dwayne, well, have a great holiday. Dwayne, I hope you get better.
Thanks. Like I said earlier, I'm gonna cut an album before the voice goes back to normal. So
Well, send us a recording of it. Again, thank the both of you, and
Oh,
I look forward to
thank you for the
connecting with you
opportunity.
in 2025.
Yep,
Yeah,
sounds
sure.
great.
Yeah.
Yep,
All right.
all right.
Okay. Well, this concludes our last of our 3 series on underserved farmers, and we've been blessed to be in the presence of Dwayne and Sarah, and have them to share with what they had to share. I'll get out the slide deck as well as the recording to everyone. Have a great holiday, everybody. Yeah, have a great holiday. And so with that said, I'll sign off.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.